This is part 3 of a 3-part podcast talking about my personal anchor points for faith when shadows are all around. I hope some of them are helpful to you and you can incorporate them into how you view the world, as well as adding your own. We have talked about how absolute certainty in life is a mirage, but despite that, there is a place for rational argument for God. We talked about belief in God being worth the gamble amongst all the alternatives. And last time we talked about the significance of Jesus and personal experience as ways to build a worldview that can sustain us through shadowy times. This time we'll talk about appetite and community as indicators of the reality of God in shadowy times. My name's Jools. This is Dechurched.com. Welcome. I have a real hankering for hot, roasted, flying aardvark. I'm sure it makes you start salivating too, just the thought of it. Feeling hungry yet? No, of course you're not. You cannot hunger for something that doesn't exist, right? Your taste buds don't kick off when I say sautéed brutpings from the planet Zod, because they don't exist. So change that wording a bit. Can having a hunger imply its existence? C.S. Lewis, the writer of the Narnia stories, thought so. He said this, I remain conscious of a desire which no natural happiness can satisfy. He was arguing that amongst all our earthly happinesses, there is a sense of wanting something more. He said, if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. This isn't a perfect argument, but I like it. The longing for integrity or love or meaning or justice, the sense of an empty space where something ought to be, something more, the desire for transcendence. It is there in humanity. It shapes every major religion. Why would blind and random nature create this appetite? Accidental evolution? Maybe, but unlikely in my view. Is it a projection of the psyche in some way? Again, maybe. But Lewis was not an idiot and was surrounded by people who could have said that to him, experts in those kinds of fields. It is just as reasonable to add this to the bank of things making up our worldview. Appetite. Hunger implies food. Thirst implies there is such a thing as liquid. The longing for meaningful destiny implies its existence. Appetite for a purpose in life or a hunger for spirituality speaks of something more, a reality that is there. Ecclesiastes says he has put eternity in the hearts of humanity. We like our joys, we like our pleasures and our positive experiences, but there is a hunger for something more. Sex, for example, is fantastic fun. But for all humanity, there's longing for an even more lasting connection. I suspect that is why some get caught up with ever more erotic stimuli, a longing for lasting joys. Our appetite for meaning and connection points us towards something higher, something bigger than we can at this point imagine. And I'd go further with this. In the shadows, when we feel like we're gasping for water in a dry place, our thirst or our hunger can actually be an indicator of something beyond us that we are missing and longing for. And yet, ironically, we so often interpret our sense of God's absence as evidence of his non-existence. In other words, we recognize a God-shaped space, or at least a bigger shape than our current appetite can fulfill. And seen a certain way, that space itself can be evidence of God's existence. The fact that we miss it and we're longing for his presence actually implies it exists. We feel its absence. We recognize the darkness can point us towards a reality that there is light. Now, you can argue against this from a naturalistic frame of reference, but for me personally, it's one of those reference points I find helpful in shadowed times. What else keeps me walking? I would say community, people. Now, of course, if you're familiar with the story of Job in the Old Testament, he found out that community is not always helpful when your world has collapsed. People can be judgmental, unwise, unkind, unable to understand what's going on with you, unable to fix you, and then they abandon you. Maybe they're just unable to cope with your questions or doubts. But there are places with people of mature love who aren't constantly trying to fix your problem, but are able to sit with you and not impose something on you. They don't violate your space. They don't impose their agendas. They just love. When you find groups or individuals like that, hold on to them and don't let go. There's a famous song by Carole King, "You've Got a Friend." The lyrics are, "You just call out my name and you know wherever I am, I'll come running to see you again. Winter, spring, summer or fall, all you have to do is call and I'll be there. You've got a friend." Sometimes that friend has a formal role, a counselor, a spiritual director, or even a pastor. More often, it's someone else. Whoever it is, choose well. We humans are social creatures. We need those who hold a candle in the dark when our hands are shaking too much. We need those who will hold our precious stories and fragile faith without feeling the need to fix it. Try and find people such as these. Spend money on a spiritual director if you can. Care of your soul, particularly if you've been wounded by Christians, is as vital as the money you spend fixing your car. In shadow times, we need others who are able to sit with us when all we see is darkness. Now, this is the last of my reference points. And although I have stated this last, the company of wise and loving others is probably the first port of call when the shadows close in. So let me conclude some of these things that I've been saying on these 3 podcasts. These are my anchor points when the waves are crashing around me. Now, as we have said, all worldviews are composites, mosaics. I could have talked about all kinds of evidences for God or Jesus or other methods to keep hope alive. But these are the ones that I've found helpful. None of the individual reference points I've outlined are undeniable proofs, just anchor points. But I've found that they've kept me hanging in there when all else has failed, when the waters are stormy and all seems shaken. And together they work. It's like that band you liked who together produce better music than when listened to as solo artists. The sum of the whole is better than the individual parts. You can dissect each of the individual arguments or reference points, explain them away, and you can say that this argument seems only a bit plausible, but for me, the sheer number of them makes them plausible. That's my view. Let me know what works for you. So how do we bring this home to roost? How do we make this work? What do we do? I want to encourage us. Have some things in your spiritual resuscitation kit, your first aid kit that keeps you walking with Jesus. A reasoned argument or 2 that resonates with you, learn it. Might be ones I've mentioned or others. There are loads out there. Learn some of them. Don't pretend they're the whole story, because walking by faith does mean living with unanswered questions. I'd say also take note of strange moments of synchronicity or spiritual glimpses you might have. That dream you had may not have been caused by spicy meatballs the night before. It may be the presence of the one who holds all things together and in whom we live and have our being. Inklings, glimpses, moments. Take note of them and dethrone a little of that Western worldview that says all things of natural origin have nothing to do with God. We'll talk a little bit more on that later in the year when we talk about noticing. I want to encourage you also, keep reading, talking to Jesus. In the moments of despair or when the sun is shining, let your emotions go with him. He won't be offended. Study who he is and his gracious love. Find comfort in him. Find wise and loving people who allow you to vent your spleen and let your feelings be out there. We are social creatures, we humans. We need others sometimes to be a crutch for our faltering faith. And even if others have let you down, don't give up seeking community. contact me through our Facebook page if you would like to talk further. The point of all this is to say, create a mosaic of your foundational story for life out of such things as I've mentioned. It's not a complete list, it's just mine. And one final comment. Paul says we know in part, but then we will see face to face. We rage at the unknowing. But it's a slow burn, this Christian faith. Knowing comes through walking during shadowy times over a long course of a life. In a few weeks' time, we will start looking at the theme of noticing God a little bit more and how we can do that better. Next time, we're going to have an interview with a theologian asking her some questions on the resources that she thinks are there in the Christian tradition for thriving spiritually outside the four walls of the church. In the meantime, thanks for listening. Don't forget to join the conversation on Facebook and to like this podcast. My name's Jools. This is Dechurched.com.